welcome to episode 14 of Learning Photography. Something a little bit different today. We're coming in from outside and going to take a look at those pesky stops that I keep referring to. I want to make sure before we go any further into the series that everyone's comfortable with and clear about just what stops are, because I'm referring to them all the time. Full stops, third stop increments, and so on. So it's important that you get a grasp of this. So a stop, what is a stop? I'll put some links down below. There's some other folks who have described this as well, and I think it's worthwhile hearing it from different people. But a stop is basically the doubling of light or the halving of light that's coming in through the lens into your camera to hit the sensor to create an image. And by default, for the most part these days, digital cameras come with when you go from one stop to another, they're third stop increments. So for example, if we take 1/30th of a second, if you set your camera at 1/30th of a second, I'll wait till you get it on, okay? Get it on 1/30th of a second, and then turn the dial that changes your shutter speed 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Is it at 1/60th? Then your third stops, and you're finished. But if it went beyond 1/60th, that means that you're in half stop. So 1, 2 would have brought you to 160, and the third click would take you halfway to the next stop, or next full stop. So if that's the case with your camera, then what you need to do is refer to your manual and find out how you change from half stop increments to third stop increments. It's usually just a thing on a menu, and it's easy to do. It might be referred to as EV, and EV stands for exposure value. So exposure value increments or exposure value stops. If you look in your manual, I'm sure you can find it. And then the other issue is just remembering these things. Well, ISO and shutter speed stops are pretty straightforward. Let's start with ISO. You know, if your base ISO is 100, that means that's the least sensitive ISO setting on your camera. On mine, it's 200. To make your sensor more sensitive, because there's less and less light, you go 2 times 100 to 200, 2 times 200 to 400, 2 times 400 to 800. And in between, there are other values. Now, I don't care about those other values. I never memorize them. I made some charts I'm going to share with you, and you can look at them if you want, but I don't know what those numbers usually are. But I do remember what I refer to as full stops. A full stop really is just, in the case of three increments, it's just 3 clicks to the next whole stop. I think in terms of 1/30th being a full stop, 1/60th being a full stop, 1/25th being a full stop, and then the pieces in between are the increments. But you could just as easily, you know, let me look at my chart here, 1/30th, 1/3 stops faster is 1/40th of a second. So if I went from 1/40th to 1/50th to 1/60th to 1/80th, that's a full stop as well. But when I refer to full stop, I'm talking about the going from 1/15th to 1/30th to 1/60th and so on up the chart. So those two are fairly easy to remember, because since shutter speeds are a fraction, and the denominator, the number in the bottom, you just double that. So 1/15th of a second times 2 is 30. 1/30th of a second times 2 times 2 times the 30 is 60, and so on. The only anomaly is from 1/60th of a second to the next one. It's not 1/20th of a second, it's 1/25th of a second. That's a math anomaly, so we won't get into that. So that's ISO and shutter speed. Aperture is a little bit different. Aperture, because it is really a math-based calculation, depending on the focal length of your lens, and it's a representation. That number, that f-stop number, is a representation of how large the opening is in your lens. And so if you have a lens, and this varies from lens to lens, you can buy a relatively inexpensive lens, or the lens that typically comes as what's called a kit lens, typically starts at f3.5 and will go up to f22. Some cameras will go all the way to f32. So on my chart, if we start at f2, the next smallest aperture, but the next highest number is 2.8. And then the next full stop, in other words, halving of the light that the aperture opening allows into the lens is f4. And then from f4 we go to f5.6, from 5.6 we go to f8. And you'll notice there is a pattern, as I mentioned before. f2, then every other one. So f2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 4 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. 2 times 16 is 32 if your lens goes that far. And the same thing with 2.8. 2.8 times 2 is 5.6 and so on. There's a math anomaly there too, but and the same thing. I consider f2 to 2.8 a full stop, and it really is because it's 3 clicks, as we've talked. But I think of those numbers as being the full stop numbers, and those are the numbers that I will usually suggest that you click to. Sometimes just to get some light, we may have to go to a third stop or a 2/3 stop. So these charts I have as a PDF for you to download. You can print them out and have them if you like. And there's another chart that I made actually for my flash classes. So it has flash power as another variable, which is what happens when you're working with flash. But it does have aperture, shutter speed, and ISO all in a line right here. So I'll make that available as well. The important thing, though, is that these become automatic. And as I said, the shutter speed and ISO are fairly straightforward. But I really recommend that you memorize these numbers for the aperture, because I'm going to be referring to them. I'm going to be using 3 clicks a lot, or 9 clicks or 12 clicks or whatever it is. But it's good if you know what these numbers are and remember that F11, F11, that's a smaller hole than F4. And so on. Those should just become automatic to you. So hopefully these things help explain stops for you. If you have any questions, please leave questions in the comments below, and I'll have links below for you to, there's no exercise for this, but these PDFs I'll have available for download, just as I have exercises available in other episodes. But the big important thing is, remember to stay in control of your camera. And I'll see you in episode 15, where we start to look at priority modes and why don't we use those. Thank you very much for checking in. Goodbye.